Chair Chavez and Co-Chair Holmes, members of the committee, my name is Steve DelBianco. I'm President and CEO of NetChoice. That's a national trade association for the tech industry based in Washington, D.C. And we are the industry, the companies that make your phone work, that make all of the cloud work. And I think you realize that all the cloud lives in a data center. So our industry, the tech industry, is number one when it comes to investing in America's communities and America's future. There's not another industry that is even remotely close. And here in Ohio, the benefits are very impressive, as you heard from witnesses last week and again this morning. So we actually should be here to celebrate how data centers have delivered billions in investment, six-figure jobs for high school grads, and massive amounts of property tax relief for Ohio. But we're not celebrating here today. I know that. So what happened? What happened? The data center narrative is now about fears over electricity rates, about water use, about noise and land use. Even while the actual experience here in Ohio and elsewhere shows that large data centers are responsible consumers of electricity and water, and they comply with all zoning ordinances regarding land use setbacks and noise. Please visit, if you haven't already, one of the New Albany area data centers not far from here, run by the companies that I represent. Ask the data center neighbors what they think about living near one. Ask the operators who work there. Ask the business community that services them. And make sure you talk to a few property taxpayers in the county to see what they think of the benefits they've received. The facts in Ohio simply don't support this new narrative of fear. So I've heard you talk about it today. So what is driving the fear and citizen resistance? Two factors: anxiety over AI and its unknown impact on their jobs, families, and culture. And number two, the public does not trust government organizations, business. It doesn't trust the media. At this point, they seem to get their views from social media and podcasts. I think some of that's an effect of the COVID experience that we went through. So those two factors, the anxiety and the social media, means that people are particularly susceptible to fears that are shared on social media. And those fears are then amplified by out-of-state activists and by a few who do not want America to build data centers, energy, and AI. European climate groups who fear for the planet catching fire if we burn more electrons, and the Chinese Communist Party, which has avowedly wants to stop President Trump from his signature initiative to beat China on AI by building American energy and data centers. I have 3 of his executive orders in my written testimony. We work with the White House on helping with that. So 20 years ago, this General Assembly faced exactly the same moment you're in today. There was a new energy industry coming into Ohio and into my native western Pennsylvania that used fracking for oil and gas exploration. Communities were very anxious and very frightened. The predictions were very dire: poisoned wells, ruined farmland, and industrialized neighborhoods. And Russia's oil and gas industry has documented amplification of those fears so that we wouldn't compete with Russia. State of New York reacted by banning all fracking at the time. In Ohio, you took a different approach. You passed HB 278 to create an expert agency, ODNR, to be in charge of statewide rules. So look at the scorecard 20 years later: $117 billion of investment, $500 million in property taxes from oil and gas. You had record oil and gas production last year, and none of the predicted catastrophes have occurred. So data centers are your generation, our generation's version of the same choice. Moratoriums, a different patchwork level. That is the New York approach. That is not the Ohio approach. The Ohio path is one you've already proven. Put facts over fear and design statewide standards to protect communities and give my industry the certainty we need to spend billions more here in Ohio. So I'll close by suggesting 2 things. First, to direct your ODNR to do a statewide study on data center water use. Not predictions, but actually how it's going. Second, please think about directing your Public Utilities Commission to study the actual effects of data centers on residential electricity bills. They designed the AEP data center tariff. They can actually show you real data, and let's see whether data centers make bills go up, or, as in Virginia and nearly every place studied, electricity bills go down because my industry absorbs more and more of the fixed costs. So if electricity, water, and noise are real concerns, then regulate them based on the facts that you learn. If the fears are exaggerated and amplified by our opponents, well, let's still protect citizens by giving them the assurances that they will not suffer from those fears. So Ohio chose evidence over fears 20 years ago. Let's do the same thing now, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Wilkin. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for being here. As someone who deals with multiple data centers, that's correct?
All over the country, sir.
Can you tell us the effect of the sales tax exemption for here in Ohio and how they view that, whether it's important, not important, how they view that, please?
Through the chairs. Senator, I testify in state capitals all over the country for the last 17 years. I also testified in the last 1 year in dozens of city and county meetings. And most of that has been about the fears that are here. But prior to the last 12, 14 months, we really did talk about whether states should expand their sales tax exemptions to include the stuff that goes into a data center. Of all the states with sales tax, all of them exempt fence posts that a farmer puts in a farm or a paddock. They exempt machinery that goes into a business from sales tax. From $1, without having to qualify or ask the state for a certificate. And you heard Dana talk about that earlier today. So I went from state to state and enacted dozens of laws where they added to their sales tax exemptions, which had been written prior to data centers, and they add an exemption for the stuff that goes into a data center, the equipment, the business machinery and equipment. Those statutes are not a tax, well, they're a tax exemption on sales tax. They're not a tax giveaway. As the chairs have noted, you don't write any checks, and it happens every day. The oil and gas industry has exceeded expectations. So, oh, God forbid, if you ran the numbers, the oil and gas industry probably has used its blanket sales tax exemption for far more than maybe there was a prediction. It's because they spend more money. When the oil and gas industry and my industry spend more money, they have a greater amount of the sales tax exemption, right? That 7% then is something they don't have to pay, and it puts data centers on par with other industries. So, Senator, your question really was, does it matter? And I heard your director of development this morning say that when you look at $1 trillion of investment from my industry, the sales tax is trivial. She called it a drop in the bucket. Quite surprised to hear that, because when you think about a $2 billion data center here in Ohio, that's $140 million in sales tax on the initial construction. And you have to understand that every 3 years, we replace half of that cost, half of that $2 billion data center, which means $1 billion in servers. We upgrade the servers that store your photos and videos so they store more, retrieve faster, burn less electricity, and run cooler. And we bolt on a lot of NVIDIA's latest set of chips, maybe some Intel chips that'll be made here in Ohio. All of that spend amounts to about half of the initial cost. So there's constant reinvestment. So an initial sales tax slug of $140 million is going to be followed up by at least $60, $70 million every 3 to 4 years. That means sales tax matters more than a drop in the bucket. And if Pennsylvania, who enacted a sales tax exemption recently, or Indiana's, or any of the other 27 states that have them, they become a more competitive choice. And if I'm running a publicly traded corporation whose equities are the basis of your retirement portfolios, as my companies are, it is imprudent for me to pick a state and have to incur an extra 7% cost over states that are offering the same energy, the same availability, but 7% less. It does matter.
Follow up?
Just a quick comment to go along with, there's a very large data center proposed in my district to the tune of $550 billion. So I figured if you just did half of what that cost would be, that would be taxed, it's right around $20 billion, which I would tend to think would get someone's attention.
Absolutely.
At a company. So
through the chairs,
thank you.
I wanted to congratulate you guys on securing the OpenAI data center. That's going to be a major boon to Ohio.
We're awesome.
Yes, we are.
Representative Workman.
Ohio is winning. Thank you, Chair. Can you talk to us a little bit about the long-term plan for these data centers? We know right now that it's bringing an incredible amount of jobs. You know, there's tons of investment as where these buildings are being built and the developments are coming to fruition. What happens when all this building is done? What happens to the jobs? What will the servers be storing in the future? How will this evolve? Right now, we're in a boom of development and activity. What happens in 10 or 15 years? And where will we be then?
Through the chairs. Representative Workman, thank you for the question. First on the notion of construction to operating jobs, and then we'll talk about the long-term future. Data centers take a few years to get sited, take 2 to 2.5 years to construct, and we put 2,000 union trade workers on the site for basically 2 to 3 years, and they build the data center. That job and income is a giant shot in the arm for the community and for the state and the surrounding counties. But after it's completed, what typically happens is we will build another building on the same campus. I think if you look at New Albany, you're going to see the same experience there, that if we buy several hundred acres, it's for 2 reasons. We want to be sure that we can stay far enough back that you have noise attenuation at the border, and we want to buy enough acreage so that we can build multiple buildings on the same site. So the construction typically goes 9 to 10 years, not just 3. And it's one of the reasons the trades are huge supporters of data centers, because they can stay in the same community for 9 or 10 years. Now, when it's done and the construction dust is gone, we put about 200 operators, full-time employees, to work in a data center of a roughly $1 billion size. Those are employees enjoying full benefits. They are high school and trade school grads who we train. They aren't college grads. And the average salary, you probably know this from New Albany, is 6 figures. These are jobs that enable somebody to not have to leave Marietta, Ohio, but stay there, have a living, grow a family, and stay part of the community they grew up in. It's a unique opportunity that they don't have to head off to Cleveland or Cincinnati or someplace else. So that is why high school guidance counselors, for instance, and shop teachers, if they're still around, really love the idea of letting people work from high school to trade school and get 6 figures. So those jobs are excellent jobs, and they're permanent jobs. Now, I also think that you asked for maybe some prognostication on the long term. Just 6 years ago, I was testifying in Idaho, and the committee chair was so concerned. He said, I don't really think you're going to need this many data centers. You are overbuilding, and this was 6 years ago. And I asked them all to pull out their phones and look at their photos and videos and scroll back a little bit to see if they've ever deleted any old photos and videos, or the messages that make copies of the photos and videos and send it. So they asked me, why do you need so many data centers, Mr. DelBianco? And I told them, why do you need so many data centers? We are not building them for us. We're building them for the customers that we serve. And what we keep in our own personal inventory is paltry compared to what businesses, government, educational institutions store in the cloud. So that demand, Representative, is going nowhere but up. And over time, it will probably get to the point where it gets too expensive to store. Right now, everybody just bumps up their $2 a month to Apple for more storage. At some point, people are going to re-examine that and maybe get rid of their old fireworks videos from 4th of July 7 years ago. But the trajectory has all suddenly gone onto steroids because of AI. And I do hope all of you have used AI chatbots, AI search from Google, AI from all of my companies. It is transformative, and it requires so much more computing power, electricity, and more data, because the raw material for AI is electricity plus data. So as perhaps our own personal storage might diminish, the cloud storage for companies and for the AI to drive our new economy will increase. So I think you can be confident that those data centers will be refurbished and refreshed. They don't decay, refurbished and refreshed. It is one of the risks to diminishing the sales tax exemption. If you start to force data centers to pay sales tax on business machinery and equipment, while no one else does in Ohio, and other states maintain the exemption, then maybe every 3 to 4 years they don't really upgrade a data center. And this is not a prediction, but it's possible that over time, as the data center becomes less and less competitive, too expensive to run, the companies could close it down. And they need to be held to remediate the site completely, restore it to its prior condition, and ensure that they clean up any mess if they leave. But I don't think that is likely to happen.
Follow-up?
Follow-up, Chair. Thank you. Thank you so much for that clarification. Great response. So I guess then my question is, it sounds as though we're building a massive neural network of memories of everything that we've ever done in our lives. What will AI do with that?
Through the chairs? You're certainly right. We have built a network of it. And when it comes to AI regulation, that's the other half of my life, is regulating that, where I live in Washington, D.C. And we are pushing very hard for Congress to give a national standard establishing that the contractual promises that are made when you're using ChatGPT or you're using Claude or Meta or Gemini, that the contractual requirements are met, and that when you use that AI, there needs to be a firm disclosure of whether any of what you're loading into your AI will be used to retrain the model. On the storage of data, for instance, your Apple photos, Apple does not allow those photos to be used for any training by AI. But if the company were to begin to change that policy, we need to require that they transparently tell all of us that that data might be used for AI and give us the opportunity to opt out of any such thing. It is actually daunting to consider what AI could do if it actually looked at everything I have ever written, said, or looked at. I mean, a profile of me that I'd probably like better than myself, but I don't want that to happen without my full consent.
Any further questions from the committee? Senator Blackshear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for your testimony. In your testimony, you said that data centers have proven to be good neighbors and economic engines in Ohio. I just want to just touch on the good neighbors part. And you talked a lot about the disinformation campaigns that are out here. Have you all gone directly to the people who actually live in these communities in which these data centers reside? One of the things we've heard in past testimony from the data centers themselves is that they feel like they can do a better job of getting information out to the community and having those interactions. So I guess my question to you is, from your perspective, from your role, are you all actually going out into the communities and having these conversations?
Through the chairs. Thank you, Senator, for the question. So 2 elements to it. The answer is yes. I make my living in state capitals and towns and town councils and county commissioner meetings. Prior to last year, didn't have too many of them. Because when a data center went into New Albany Town Council doesn't need to meet and hear complaints from neighbors. There are no complaints. There are, however, huge complaints if there's a new data center proposed for a county, a town, or an area that doesn't have one yet. And in the past year, that is where, I wouldn't call it just disinformation, but amplification of false information. That is where my industry has had to wake up. And they're not done waking up yet. They need to show up in force and try to address and listen carefully to what you say you're scared of. You're scared of electricity. You're scared about noise. Don't want to see all the farm land used up. And you might be concerned, Representative, about water use. So whatever they are, we have to hear it and then present facts calmly. But I can tell you, after long, late nights of county meetings just south of here in Kentucky, that the room was full of people that were frightened. They had the AI anxiety. They were listening to what they'd seen on social media. They had color-coordinated T-shirts. They were playing videos of the noise they said would come from a data center. And after the second night, it became clear I wasn't going to change any of their minds. All I did was focus on the county commissioners at the front of the room, giving them clear conscience to vote the way they wanted to vote, based on the facts. Before they voted, however, you've got to hear this, they were concerned about visiting one so they could say personally they've been to a data center. They got in a van, Mason County, Maysville, Kentucky, across the Ohio River, straight up to New Albany. Spent only a few hours there. They talked to people that work there, they talked to the neighbors, the business community. They listened with their own ears as to what you could hear at the edge of the property. They concluded that the fears were unfounded, that Ohio had done it right, got back in the van, and the next day voted unanimously for new zoning to allow data centers in a community that desperately needs jobs and investment. So that ended up, Senator, being what tipped the balance, is visiting an actual community where data centers are, changes all the narrative about what bad things might happen in a community where a data center might be. So my industry is engaging more and more in communities where we are visiting to propose a data center, but we aren't spending much time in the communities that already have them, since they are happy enough to have more.
Yeah, just a quick point of clarification. So I know you come to state houses and you go to council meetings, but do you actually talk to residents as well, outside of elected officials? Thank you.
Through the chairs? Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't be doing my job if I just simply thought that a lectern was the place to deliver and communicate. So I'd spent time at breakfasts, in a town hall meeting. I talked with the residents that are in the room. And if you have a calm conversation with one-on-one, surprising progress can be made. But where more than one are gathered in the name of stopping a data center, they inflame each other. You guys knew where I was going with that. They inflame each other. It was close. It was very close. They inflame each other with more and more stories to say we can't have a data center. And some of the anxiety shows up, and I'll ask them questions. Water, electricity, noise, all solved. Would you still be okay with a data center? Most say no. They're scared of AI. And 2 women in Kentucky said, if we stop the data center, maybe the AI won't come. And I did not laugh, Representative, although I thought I might. But that happens all the time. And the only way to deal with it is to listen carefully and understand what they're going through. I can't make everyone happy, but they need to know that they were heard.